The Pope of the Crusade, Pope Urban II. He called for holy war, then set the world on fire.
On Tuesday, November 27, 1095, thousands of people gathered in a cold, open field outside the French city of Clermont. The local cathedral was far too small to hold the swelling crowd of at least 300 clerics and an uncountable mass of nobility and commoners. They had come to hear a highly anticipated speech by the head of the Catholic Church. Ascending a wooden platform erected specifically for the occasion, the man who spoke did not command a vast standing army, nor did he hold undisputed control over his own capital city in Rome. Yet, with a masterful display of rhetoric, he articulated a vision that would fundamentally alter the geopolitical map of the world. He spoke of the suffering of Eastern Christians and the desecration of holy sites in Jerusalem, calling upon the fractured, warring knights of Western Europe to turn their weapons away from each other and toward the East. According to historical tradition, the crowd erupted with cries of Deus vult, God wills it. In that single electrifying moment, Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade, unleashing a movement that would mobilize nearly 100,000 people, fused religious devotion with military violence, and ignite a clash of civilizations whose echoes still resonate more than 900 years later. Pope Urban II was born Odo of Châtillon, also known as Odo of Lagery, around the year 1035 in the Champagne region of France. He served as the head of the Catholic Church and ruler of the Papal States from his election on March 12, 1088, until his death on July 29, 1099. A Frenchman by birth and a monk by training, Urban II's main fields of influence were religion, medieval politics, and international diplomacy. He is considered one of the most influential popes in history because he successfully navigated the Church through the existential crisis of the investiture controversy, significantly centralized the administrative power of the Roman Curia, and, most famously, initiated the crusading movement. Through his diplomatic acumen and legal reforms, he transformed the papacy from an embattled religious office into the supreme political and moral arbiter of Western Europe. The world into which Odo of Châtillon was born was highly volatile. Europe in the 11th century was dominated by feudalism, a deeply fragmented system where local warlords and knights wielded unchecked violence, often terrorizing the peasantry and rival nobles alike. Odo was born into this noble knightly class, the son of a prominent family holding lands in Châtillon-sur-Marne. This aristocratic upbringing gave him an intimate understanding of the military elite's psychology, values, and sense of honor, knowledge he would later weaponize at Clermont. Despite his noble blood, Odo was destined for the church. He received a rigorous education at the Cathedral School of Rheims, one of the premier intellectual centers of Europe at the time. There, he studied under Bruno of Cologne, a brilliant theologian who would later found the strict Carthusian order. Clergy deeply troubled him. Seeking spiritual purity away from the corruption of worldly politics, Odo made a decision that would redirect the trajectory of his life. Sometime between 1067 and 1070, Odo abandoned his lucrative post at Rheims and entered the Abbey of Cluny in Burgundy. At the time, Cluny was the undisputed center of monastic reform in Europe. Under the leadership of Abbot Hugh of Semur, Cluny oversaw a network of over 1,000 dependent monasteries. The Cluniac reform championed strict adherence to the rule of Saint Benedict, absolute celibacy, and, crucially, the liberation of the Church from the control of secular kings and lords. Odo thrived in this rigorous environment, rising to the position of Grand Prior, second only to the abbot. His time at Cluny instilled in him a profound belief in papal supremacy and ecclesiastical independence. These beliefs caught the attention of Pope Gregory VII, a fiery and uncompromising reformer who was locked in a bitter struggle with Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, a conflict known as the investiture controversy, which centered on whether the Pope or the monarch had the right to appoint bishops. In 1079, Gregory VII summoned Odo to Rome, recognizing his administrative brilliance and theological reliability. By 1080, Gregory had elevated Odo to the position of Cardinal Bishop of Ostia, thrusting the former monk into the highest echelons of international politics and shaping his understanding of the Church as an embattled institution requiring shrewd, strategic defense. Odo's transition from a cloistered monk to a public power player occurred during his tenure as a papal legate. Between 1084 and 1085, Gregory VII dispatched Odo to France and Germany to rally support for the papal cause against Emperor Henry IV. The situation was disastrous. Henry IV had invaded Rome, installed a rival pope known as Antipope Clement III, and forced Gregory VII into exile, where he died in 1085. Odo navigated this treacherous political landscape with remarkable diplomatic skill. Unlike the abrasive Gregory VII, Odo was pragmatic and persuasive, managing to hold the fractured pro-papal alliance together. Following Gregory's death, the papacy fell into deeper disarray. A successor, Pope Victor III, was elected but reigned only briefly, spending most of his 16-month papacy outside of Rome due to the antipope's occupation. Upon Victor's death in 1087, the reformist faction of the Church looked to the Cardinal Bishop of Ostia. Odo had proven himself not only as a loyal adherent to the Gregorian Reforms, but also as a man capable of the compromise and tact necessary to salvage the papacy from complete ruin. Odo's breakthrough moment arrived on March 12, 1088. With Rome still under the firm control of Antipope Clement III and imperial forces, a small, desperate assembly of roughly 40 cardinals and bishops gathered in the coastal city of Terracina, south of Rome. There, they elected Odo as the new pope. He took the name Urban II. This election changed his life instantly, placing the survival of the Catholic Church squarely on his shoulders. He inherited a papacy in exile, entirely cut off from the traditional seat of power in the Lateran Palace, and starved of financial resources. This crisis forced Urban II to rely on his greatest strengths: diplomacy, patience, and legal strategy. Instead of launching a doomed military assault on Rome, Urban spent the first several years of his papacy traveling through southern Italy and France, systematically building alliances with Norman warlords and European monarchs. By acknowledging the limits of his immediate power and playing a long-term political game, Urban II slowly delegitimized his rivals and established himself as the undisputed spiritual leader of Latin Christendom. Urban II's pontificate was defined by a series of meticulously planned achievements that rebuilt papal authority. In 1089, he convened the Synod of Melfi, issuing decrees against clerical marriage and simony, the buying and selling of church offices, signaling that the reform movement was still alive despite the papacy's exile. By November 1093, Urban's diplomatic maneuvering paid off. With the help of the Norman armies, he finally gained control of Rome, though pockets of resistance remained for years. Furthermore, he established the Curia Romana, a reorganized professional administrative body that stabilized papal finances and legal procedures. In March 1095, Urban presided over the Council of Piacenza. It was here that he received ambassadors from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. The Byzantines had suffered severe territorial losses to the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia and begged for Western mercenary support. Urban saw an unprecedented opportunity to reunite the Eastern and Western churches, which had been in schism since 1054, while simultaneously directing the violence of Western knights outward. On November 27, 1095, he delivered his historic sermon at the Council of Clermont, officially initiating the First Crusade and simultaneously expanding the Peace of God movement, which forbade violence against non-combatants in Europe. In October 1098, he held the Council of Bari, a major theological debate attempting to reconcile the Greek and Latin churches, highlighting his commitment to institutional unity. Urban II died in Rome on July 29, 1099, exactly 14 days after the crusading armies successfully captured Jerusalem. Due to the slow speed of medieval communication, he passed away without ever knowing that his massive, unprecedented military gamble had succeeded. Pope Urban II is universally recognized for single-handedly inventing the crusading movement. While earlier popes had sanctioned limited military actions, Urban II achieved something entirely novel. He synthesized the concept of a just war with the tradition of religious pilgrimage. At Clermont, Urban promised a revolutionary spiritual reward, the remissio peccatorum, or remission of sins, for anyone who took the vow of the cross and marched to liberate Jerusalem. He understood the deep psychological anxieties of medieval knights, who feared damnation for their violent lifestyles, but knew no other way to live. By offering them a way to achieve salvation through the very violence that previously condemned them, Urban II sparked a mass mobilization unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Between 60,000 and 100,000 men, women, and children answered the call. His fame spread rapidly because the First Crusade successfully captured Antioch in 1098 and Jerusalem in 1099, an event viewed by contemporaries as a literal miracle. Consequently, his name became eternally synonymous with the era of holy war. Urban II was fundamentally a pragmatist driven by the rigid idealism of his Cluniac background. Unlike his predecessor Gregory VII, who demanded absolute submission and frequently excommunicated kings, Urban possessed a subtle diplomatic mind. He understood that the papacy could not rule by divine decree alone. It required coalition building. His working style was highly organized. He functioned more like a modern chief executive than a medieval mystic. He was an exceptionally gifted communicator. Chroniclers consistently noted his eloquence, commanding physical presence, and ability to tailor his message to his audience. He motivated the masses not simply by demanding obedience, but by appealing to their existing cultural values, such as feudal loyalty, familial honor, and the defense of inherited lands. Urban deeply believed in the ultimate supremacy of the Roman Church over both the spiritual and secular realms, but he was willing to compromise on minor issues to achieve major institutional victories. His discipline was evident in his tireless travel schedule, crossing the Alps multiple times to hold synods in France and Italy, despite the physical dangers of 11th century travel. Despite his triumphs, Urban II's papacy was marred by catastrophic unintended consequences. His greatest failure was the immediate loss of control over the crusading movement he had created. Urban intended the crusade to be a disciplined, aristocratic military expedition led by his papal legate, Adhemar of Le Puy. Instead, his rhetoric inspired the People's Crusade, a massive, unorganized mob led by charismatic preachers like Peter the Hermit. This uncontrolled fervor led to horrific atrocities. In the spring of 1096, rogue crusading contingents, most notably those led by Count Emico of Leiningen, carried out devastating pogroms against Jewish communities in the Rhineland cities of Speyer, Worms, and Mainz. Thousands of Jews were massacred in what is recognized as one of the first major outbreaks of mass anti-Semitic violence in European history. While Urban had not called for violence against Jews, his rhetoric of defeating the enemies of Christ was easily misinterpreted and violently applied by radicalized mobs. Furthermore, his exact words at Clermont are heavily debated. No official transcript exists. The four main contemporary chroniclers, Fulcher of Chartres, Rothet the Monk, Baldric of Dole, and Guibert of Nogent, wrote their accounts years after the speech, heavily colouring Urban's words with their own theological biases and the hindsight of the Crusade's success. Additionally, Urban faced criticism for extending the concept of holy war, which some contemporary theologians felt contradicted the pacifist teachings of the early Christian Church. Urban II's influence fundamentally altered the course of Western civilization. In the short term, he successfully saved the Reformed papacy from the brink of destruction. By outmaneuvering the Holy Roman Emperor and anti-Pope Clement III, he established the papacy as an independent, centralized power. His long-term impact, however, is heavily debated. By launching the Crusades, he permanently shifted the relationship between the Christian and Islamic worlds, initiating centuries of warfare in the Levant, Spain, and Eastern Europe. Culturally and economically, the movement of massive armies opened trade routes to the east, stimulating the medieval economy and bringing Islamic science, philosophy, and classical texts back into Western Europe, which indirectly paved the way for the Renaissance.
However, his dream of reuniting the Eastern and Western churches failed spectacularly. The influx of Western armies destabilized the Byzantine Empire, and the cultural friction between Latin Crusaders and Greek Christians ultimately deepened the schism, culminating in the disastrous sack of Constantinople in 1204. Moreover, the legal mechanism of the indulgence, which Urban formalized, would eventually become heavily corrupted, ultimately sparking Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation over 400 years later. Today, Pope Urban II is remembered primarily as the architect of the Crusades. In Catholic history, he is revered as a brilliant administrator and a saintly reformer. In 1881, Pope Leo XIII officially beatified him, assigning his feast day as July 29th. However, in broader historical and secular contexts, his legacy is highly controversial. Modern historians often view him as a master geopolitical strategist who utilized religious fervor to solve domestic European problems. The Crusades he birthed are heavily criticized in modern times as early examples of Western imperialism and religiously sanctioned genocide. Yet institutions he helped design, such as the Roman Curia, still form the administrative backbone of the Vatican today. A massive bronze statue of Urban II stands in Châtillon-sur-Marne, erected in 1887, gazing towards the east, a physical reminder of the enduring and polarizing shadow he casts over European history. The life of Pope Urban II demonstrates the terrifying, transformative power of rhetoric when it meets the psychological anxieties of an era. Born into a violent society, he did not seek to eliminate war, but rather to redirect it towards a unified institutional purpose. Urban II was not merely a spiritual leader, he was a political genius who understood that people will endure immense suffering if given a narrative that promises absolute moral justification. His papacy reveals the profound duality of historical influence. In his quest to bring peace to a fractured Europe and unity to his church, he unleashed a global mechanism of holy war whose violence, intolerance, and geopolitical consequences are still being untangled by the world today.